You'll hear me, and you'll start waving shortly. It is wonderful to have so many people here. You've come from schools, from voluntary organisations, local authorities, academy trusts, academia. And if this were a face-to-face event, I think Rosemary and I would have spent the last 15 minutes saying hello to people that we haven't seen for far too long. So it's lovely to see you all. This session is scheduled to end at 5 o'clock, but we think that the question and answer session may well run beyond that. And we can carry on after that, because this is such an important issue that just doesn't get talked about often enough. So the session is going to be recorded. We will circulate the recording, the chat transcript, the slides, and some links to useful things afterwards, and we'll put them online as well. When we did our rehearsal yesterday, Rosemary's internet from Jamaica was a bit temperamental, but bear with us if she drops out. We've worked out how to get her back. For any reason the meeting does just end, click on the link again and we should be able to continue. We've muted all of you to try and reduce background noise. You can turn your video off if you prefer to. If you want to ask a question, please put it in the chat, and when we get to the end of the first bit, we'll select some, and we'll probably unmute you and ask you to ask the question and give you the opportunity to disagree with the answer as well. If you've got any technical issues at all, if you're just using the chat, message Rebecca Smith, she will try and sort them out. If we just introduce ourselves briefly. For those who don't know me, I'm Graham Smith. At various times in my life, I've been an English teacher, an EAL teacher, a local authority consultant, and senior manager, which is how I met Rosemary 18 years ago. I ended up teaching on a wonderful course in education for 8 years. 2012, I set up the EAL Academy, which is managing today's event. Rosemary, would you like to say hello as well?
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Hi everybody. I'm Rosemary Campbell-Stephens, and I am now semi-retired and living in Jamaica, and I am joining this conversation from Jamaica. But I've worked in education now for a long time, you know, good 40 years. And as Graham said, we go back at least 18 years when we first met each other. And you know that Graham's known for data, and so he put up one of his posts on LinkedIn, and I was sort of interacting with Graham around the post, and you know how the interactions are very stulted when you can only use so many characters and so on. And so I just rang Graham and I said, I'd really love to have a conversation with you about this. And wouldn't it be good if we just had that conversation publicly and invited some of our friends? So that's how it started. Graham? Unmute yourself, Graham.
Right. Let's get going. I thought I'd just start, because one of the questions Rosemary has asked me is, well, how did you start dealing with data? And the answer is that I was working in Hammersmith and Fulham 30 years ago, just after the ILEA had finished. My boss's boss had a wonderful new computer that he didn't want. They asked, who wants it? And I said, okay, I'll have it. About 30 years ago, computers largely were black screens with green text on them. But somehow I taught myself how to use the database on it. Because I wanted to see whether the team I was in, which was an EAL advisory team, was working with the right schools. Because we got some need analysis and we got a record of what we'd done. What I found out, of course, was that we weren't going where the need was greatest. So that was my first lesson from data. You need to ask it the right questions. But asking those questions could lead you to really interesting places. And that, I guess, is how we got here today. So, Rosemary, can I ask you about perhaps a couple of experiences you've had where the data helped you to catalyze change at system level?
Mm-hmm. Well, Graham, you know, being Black and in the education system in the UK, you're constantly feeling as if you are the data, you know, you're part of what the discussion is about, and so really from day one, Graham, from the moment I started to train as a teacher, I was questioning that data because that data was talking about us as African Caribbean people, and I didn't recognize us in the conversations that we were having. So even as a young teacher, and you know, my subject is English. I was a teacher of English in secondary. I was questioning that data, and particularly that data around race, and later around class. And I think for me, when I first started to take it really, really seriously was as an advisor in Waltham Forest. I was a general advisor for institutional review and development in Waltham Forest, 1989, 1990s, when I started down there. And then Ofsted started a couple of years after, and so we were all sort of forced to become part-time Ofsted inspectors. And looking at how the data was used, and looking at the fact that the data without a narrative only tells you part of the story. And what really concerned me is that teachers didn't feel confident enough to even challenge the data or ask questions of the data. So certain things just became locked into a narrative. You know, certain groups were just described as disadvantaged by the data. And that notion of what disadvantage is, or it wasn't ever questioned. And so for me, I've always been questioning the data. I really have. And I think really that the Ofsted thing, being the Ofsted inspector, that's when it kind of kicked off. And once you get teachers to question the data, and once you get leaders to question the data and to come up with their own data, then they become much better, as you say, at using that data to leverage change.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can we have that next slide, Graham?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because this is the slide you put up. Well, yeah. It was a similar slide that you put up on LinkedIn. And just talk us through it. Tell us.
So what, for those who don't know what the good level of development is, there are kind of various things that teachers think about and record to do with pupils in reception, basically. And when that data is collated, a judgment is made about who's doing what, and something called the good level of development is a basic. There are many ways of assessing this data, but that's the one that kind of gives you an overview. So it's how well are these children getting on with the things we're looking for? And you can see that nationally, it's actually 69% of pupils have what's described as a good level of development. Now, some are a little bit better than that. The Gypsy Roma ones, Pakistani ones, the only other white ones are some way off. But everybody else is in and around, statistically probably not very significantly different to the overall average. And one of the things that struck me very forcefully about that is that if that's where pupils of Caribbean heritage start, I think that's just squashed the argument about background to explain their outcomes later on. It seems to me that it suggests maybe there's something in the system that's making it happen, rather than what these children arrive at school with. Those are questions, because data just help to ask better questions, but I think they're ones that I'd like to see a discussion about.
Absolutely.
There's a lot in that.
And I was, you know, I was struck that when Graham put up this slide, it was a similar slide, not the exact one, but when he put it up on LinkedIn, and he posed that question. He said, if African Caribbean youngsters are starting school with a level of readiness for schooling that is on par with other groups, then why is it that when we get to the other end of their schooling career, they are underachieving at the rate that they are? That's the first thing. And then he said, look, it can't be about background, can it? Because if it were about background, then they'd be starting at a lower rate than other groups. And the responses that came started talking about background. They just ignored what Graham said and started talking about background, and started talking about the fact that Chinese children come from a background where they value education. So, you know, straight away my hackles went up. And I thought to myself, you know what, we need to have a conversation about this. So I wonder if we can have the next slide, Rebecca. So what we wanted to do was to just begin to set the record straight. And I feel that I've been kind of setting the record straight for 40 years. And now it's my grandchildren that will be in the system that we're talking about. But apparently it still needs to be said. So when you're talking about African Caribbean students in British schools, you do have to go back to the Windrush generation, which would be my parents. And my parents came over here from Jamaica my father came in 1952 and brought my mother over a year after. And when they came over, they were here for 6 years, living in one room, until they moved out of that one room and bought their 5-bedroom, 3-reception house sitting in a 1/4 acre of land in Handsworth. Working class people. They brought over their children from the Caribbean, their older children, and myself and my sister were born much later in 60. I was born 61, my sister in 64. So when we're talking about Caribbean people, that's who we're talking about. And the only reasons that my parents came here came to the UK was for better employment prospects and to improve the chances in terms of education for their children. So this narrative that's built up about African Caribbean families not valuing education, I really don't understand. We came with an ideology around self-sufficiency. It wasn't about handouts, it was about looking out for ourselves. We had to, because we were coming into a very racist system, which my parents' generation found out very, very quickly. I mean, that self-sufficiency, for example, they couldn't get loans to get a mortgage. So the way that my father bought his 5-bedroom house was by throwing partner, which is something within the African Caribbean community that we still do. And it's a way of us collectively saving and working together economically. So within African Caribbean structures, there is this whole thing about self-sufficiency. And the other thing that was said in the response to Graham was about Chinese family structures. So let me tell you a little bit about African Caribbean family structures. As I said, my father and my mother were married and they came over here with their children from Jamaica, and then they had 2 more children here. And what my father did was to also bring over his parents from Jamaica. So my paternal grandparents were in the same house as we were. We grew up with our paternal grandparents. That was unusual for Caribbean families, but that's the kind of family structure. We had extended family structures. It was my grandfather actually that taught me to read because we value education, you know, and to just labor the point just a little bit before I move on. If you look at African Caribbean communities and you look at their activity around education, we are the most active historically and currently in terms of parental and community involvement around education. And our community activism started with us setting up supplementary schools in the 1960s, before any other group did. We were the first to set up supplementary schools. And the state's response was actually quite harsh to some of those supplementary schools that were set up. So I can talk about the one in Birmingham that was set up in 1965. And so all the Birmingham people will know about 104 and will know about Beanie Brown and the African Caribbean Self-Help Organization. Before 104 was located in Handsworth, where it still is now, it was in Winson Green. That was where the original organization was. And in 1965, when the African Caribbean Self-Help Organization set up its own supplementary school, because we weren't coming from a position of, let's blame the state, let's blame the schools, let's sort out ourselves and let's educate our own children. When they set up that supplementary school, it was focused on English, maths, Black studies, as it was called at the time, and self-defense, because our boys and our girls, but particularly our boys, needed to defend themselves on the very violent streets that we found ourselves. You know, they were fighting, having to fight all the time, you know, fighting the skinheads and all the rest of it, and all the kids that would be fighting them and bullying them, and of course, fighting the police. So self-defense was set up, and it would be things around karate, how to roll, how to drop, how to block, and all of that. The Home Office closed that Saturday school in 1965 on the basis that the organization was a radical group that was radicalizing its young people. And what they used to shut the school was the fact that self-defense was being taught alongside English, maths, and science. So that kind of movement came out of the Black Power movement in the 60s. And for me, the Black Power movement, for those people who don't know, is the original Black Lives Matter movement. So it was around us, as when we look at Jamaicans, as opposed to Caribbean much more broadly, we were coming from a Pan-African and Garveyite perspective in terms of communities looking after themselves. And so our first schools were set up in 1960s, and then we began to set up our African Caribbean nurseries. Next slide, please. Next slide, please, Rebecca. So quickly, and this is going back to why is it that African Caribbean communities are failing, or African Caribbean students are failing in the system now, as opposed to other groups. So as a community, we were very active around education. That was the first thing. Any of these self-help organizations, and they were all over London, Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, and nationally connected as well, were our organizations, yes? Every last one of them would have set up a school. That was to be the first thing that they would have done, a Saturday school, because of the importance of education. And at that time, so we're talking now about 60s coming into 70s, there was a great movement towards us actually reuniting ourselves with our African culture. So Rastafarianism was very strong. There was a big movement in terms of Africanizing our names. And so a lot of my friends who grew up with me would have changed their name to an African name. That whole thing about rebellion and resistance was there through our music, through our art, through our and through our drama. Black parents organized nationally in 1975. And they organized nationally in 1975 because of a pamphlet that was written by Bernard Coard, which is entitled How the West Indian Child is Made Educationally Subnormal by the British Education System. He was a Grenadian teacher in London. He wrote that pamphlet, by the way, at the Institute of Education, University College London. So for those of you who know the Institute, that's where he wrote it. And it was a catalyst for change in terms, because his audience were not teachers primarily, his audience were Black parents, because it was about us understanding how the system was already beginning to make our children, in those terms, educationally subnormal. So what can I say about African Caribbean Saturday schools before I hand back to Graham? African Caribbean Saturday schools produced educators like me, because when I was a young teacher at 19, training to be a teacher at 19 years old in Birmingham, I started working at a Saturday school. We were already aware that whatever was going on in the system, we needed to be challenging it and doing something. And the other thing I loved is that I listened the other day to Akala and understood that part of his education was through a Pan-African Saturday school. So, you know, those places are really, really important places for us. The NUS and NUT Black sections grew out of Black community organizing. It wasn't the professionals that were organizing as Black people first, it was actually our community. And if I just jump to the International Book Fair, just to give you two ways of how we were operating internationally in the 1980s and 1990s. There was an international book fair that was held in London for between 1982 and 1995. Massive book fair. That's where I got all my Black books from. All the Black books that I still have, that's where I used to get them from, through those fairs. And there would be talks and speeches about education, what it is that we needed to do. Lots of African Americans would come over. And those book fairs were organized by New Beacon Books. People in London will know about New Beacon Books, and Bogle Overture, which were publishing houses, Black publishing houses that were set up in the 1960s and 1970s. So educating the Black child conferences didn't start in London. I'll tell you about those later, but they started in Manchester with people like Paul Obinna in the 1990s. And those again were international affairs. So when people talk, Graham, about African Caribbean people not valuing education and therefore not supporting our children through education, and that's why our kids are in the state that they're in, I don't know who they're talking about. I don't know if you've ever had any experience of Saturday schools, Graham, as a white teacher.
My experience of Saturday schools, relatively limited, but one of the things I did when I was head of the Ethnic Minority Achievement Service in Islington, try and work with one of the Saturday schools, Kakai, and to try and get them to do the things they were doing for Black boys who weren't going there because the parents didn't have, you know, there were small fees to pay. You had to be able to manage all the other things in your life and get your child there safely and back. So we got Hugh to run a project for us. It was actually based at City and Islington College. And we asked schools to select boys, Black boys in years 5 and 6, who could go to this extra tuition for a couple of hours a week. I think we did it on 2 days a week as well. Pick them up from school, we took them to the college, we took them back to school where the parents could pick them up. So we took that bit out for them, didn't charge anything. And they were there and they had extra maths and English where possible with Black teachers. What they also had, which I think kind of follows up some of what you were saying about some of the very early work you did about teaching young Black boys and men how to look after themselves, was have Black men in their mid-20s talking to them about how you just stay safe on the streets. How you stay calm if the police start to accuse you of things, how you avoid things that are going wrong. And I thought that was a very powerful initiative. We know it had quite a good big impact on how well pupils did. The Black Boys results went up in the 2 years after we started that project. But these things do make a difference. I think I probably also want to say that, go back to data for a minute. What you do with data is what matters. It's not the data in itself. And one of the things I did when I started working in Islington was, after about 3 weeks, I got invited to, I was told it was a very important meeting with the director, lots of very important people. So I went along, and to be honest, it was a bit dull. So I was a bit naughty, and I looked out the window. And out of the window, you could see this nice little park, all opposite, and a road in between. And it seemed to me that when I looked out of the window, I was constantly seeing black boys of year 10 and year 11 age, not in school uniform, walking up and down the road at, 2:15 in the afternoon, when they should have been at school. Eventually, my distraction was noticed. Vincent, who was a lovely director, said to me, "Are we boring you, Graham? Because you seem to be looking out of the window." I said, "Well, it's very interesting what I've seen. I'd better tell you about it." And I prepared for that meeting by looking at the performance data of the previous year. And I said to him, "I've seen twice as many boys who should be in school studying as the number of Caribbean boys who actually got 5A to C grades last year in this borough." And I'm slightly shocked by that. He was also shocked. And he took it on, and he said, "Okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm meeting every single secondary head teacher in the borough within the next fortnight. I am going to tell them all about what you've said." The next year, the results for Black Caribbean boys doubled. They doubled from a low base, but they doubled. We didn't do much else, but what we did do is start to make a conversation happen at very senior levels. And that just makes everybody think a bit harder. Pass that on. I think sometimes it has an impact on interactions between individual teachers and individual pupils. It certainly has an effect on the way a school starts to think. And sometimes it's the little things we do, rather than the big projects that we run to raise attainment, that can have that impact if we're just a bit smart about how we use the data, and notice what's happening around us as well.
Absolutely, Graham.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And there's so many people on the chat who have real life experience of moving things on using data, and so I just very quickly want to share with people what they need to be aware of in terms of why reports and sometimes even policies written from top down don't shift things on. Okay, so the narrative that's been built up about African Caribbean youngsters would have used the term West Indian children. So when you're looking it up and trying to Google, you're going to have to look up West Indian. And it was as early as 1963 that you would see from Brent Ellier and other local authorities, a narrative developing around West Indian children underachieving. So in 1963, that would be my older brother and sister who'd just come over from Jamaica, because I would have been 2. Yeah. So those were the children that they would have been saying were underachieving. And so this narrative begins to build up about West Indians underachieving in schools. Then before we have any of the big reports that all of us know about, what you would have had is a series of select committee reports on race relations and immigration between 1968 and 1973. Those I think you can still find in the archives. So you're going to get these slides, so you'll be able to look these things up yourself. But I'm just saying that when you look at those reports, they alluded to the fact that West Indian children who were coming over from the Caribbean were not fitting into schools. Then, of course, the seminal work that everybody, and I don't know how you're going to get it now, is how the West Indian child is made educationally subnormal in the British school system. The full title, The Scandal of the Black Child in Schools in Britain by Bernard Coard, is the seminal work. It's the seminal work that was really directed at us at the Black community as a call for action, but it's been picked up by academics within the field as one of the first times that we begin to look at institutionalized racism as being the reason why our kids are failing. Then I referenced 5 reports. Only 3 are specific to education, but it's important for you to know why I've referenced the 5. So Bullock in 1975, which is a half-decent report actually, were entitled Language for Life, when Margaret Thatcher was Education Secretary, was a big focus on the teaching of English and the teaching of language, yes? And it was really focused at working class children, and looking at the fact that one of the reasons that white working class children was because of their deficiency in language. And so there was a big focus on language. And then there was a kind of passing reference to immigrant children, largely us as West Indians, and a little bit around Asian children who were now coming into the system. And really that was 1975. Then you got Rampton. Rampton 1981, West Indian children in our schools, highlighted the fact that actually anti-racist education was what was needed. The system was institutionally racist, and it did talk about teacher bias and teacher racism. And and so Rampton got fired for writing a report like that. He was removed by Margaret Thatcher after he'd written Rampton. So one of the things that happens here, and this is a pattern that you need to understand, that once reports are commissioned, and we see it now today in the reports that are commissioned, anything around race that's commissioned, what tends to happen is that you delegitimize the outcomes of the reports before they are properly published if you don't like what has been said. And so they rubbish Rampton and said, you know, he'd focused on the wrong things. And then you leak it before the report comes out. The report usually comes out at midnight or something like that, but you leak it to the press first, so that there are headlines in the press actually rubbishing the outcomes of the report before they come out. So I'm trying to show you how and why, because people keep saying, well, we keep getting these reports and they keep saying this and that and nothing happens or policy happens and so on. But that's because the reports are rubbished and there's a link with the media, and that's the way that they've always done it. The government work with the media, they leak it to the right-wing press, and then what happens is that the outcomes from those reports, if not liked, are delegitimized. Then you get the people that you really want to write reports, but Scarman, the Scarman report's got nothing to do with education as such, but it too went back to systemic racism. So enter now Swan, 1985, Education for All, and the shift now is away from anti-racist education to multicultural education. So basically it shifts away from the system. It's not about the system, it's about these people not integrating. So if we can get these people to integrate by offering a multicultural education, and by the way, we must never ever accept that we have a systemic racist system. We must never ever call it that. Let's just call it multiculturalism, inclusion, diversity, whatever we want to call it. So Swan's report was very, very well received. Then we get Mcpherson coming back, again, not an education report. Yes, the Mcpherson report after the Stephen Lawrence murder, which again puts the spotlight on institutionalized racism. And again, you see what happens around that. Laws might be passed, all kinds of policies might be put in place, but until there is an acceptance that there's institutionalized racism in the police, there's institutionalized racism in our schools, and that what we need to do is to change it, nothing changes. Over to you, Graham. Next slide.
Okay. Okay, so one of the sort of the counter narratives to what Rosemary and I have been saying is all about the white working class. And it's true, there is a white working class and there are achievement problems there. And when you look at the data, they're not very different to the achievement problems of the black working class. But one of the things we need to remember is free school meals and poverty affect some groups much more than others. And this slide, I think, sets that out very clearly. That we're probably not very surprised about the groups that are below the national average, the orange bar in the middle. But look what's at the other end, Gypsy Roma, and what are the next two? So we're talking about a third of peoples of Caribbean heritage having free school meals. And what that tells us is there's a kind of underlying economic discrimination about people being able to get well-paying jobs. We know there's discrimination across the employment market as well. But there's a kind of doubling down here on disadvantage. That begs a question of what can we do? And I think shortly we'll start to talk about schools we know that have been very successful in tackling these issues. And one of the things that I'd like to talk to you about, Rosemary, is how that's begun to change. Because I mean, we have got some very successful heads listening in at the moment. Unfortunately, one of them has to leave. Okay? So sorry, we're not going to hear from Marva. But I hope we'll hear from Dawn and anyone else who wants to chip in, who I know has been successful. But I think one of the things that strikes me was I've very much enjoyed working on and investing diversity. But over the last 10 years, I have seen the impact of it.
Yes.
It's very striking that schools in London now are much more likely to have leaders who are black or from other minority ethnic groups. There were a few in the 2000s, but not very many. Now it is quite common. The school where I'm a director of, it's a single school trust where I'm a director. I think only one of the current leadership team isn't from a minority ethnic background, and two of them are black. I think that makes a difference. How pupils perceive themselves, leaders like them. But it doesn't just happen. And I think maybe now's the time to think about what does an investing in diversity Mark II look like? Has to be different. The world's different. But I think we can sit here and look at the data and throw our hands up in the air.
Yeah.
Or we can say, we know some people have changed this and changed it radically. And pupils in their schools are really being encouraged to make the most of themselves. And we need to let lots of people know what's working, where it is working.
Absolutely right, Graham. Absolutely right. I don't know if you guys can hear the rain here, but it's coming down really loud. So I'm shouting a little bit. Next slide, Becky. I actually think that and investing in diversity in 2020, and I've got to say to everybody on the chat, the stuff that you're putting in the chat is absolutely phenomenal. It's fantastic as part of this this whole conversation, and we really are going to give you time. I hope that you can stay to have a conversation with us about this. But one of the things that I would say is that an investing in diversity that looks at the 2020 situation, needs to begin to look at how it is that we can disrupt the narrative around class, being Black, being code for disadvantage and failure. Yeah. Now, so for example, I am a product. I used to have free school meals when I was at school. So this narrative that says free school meals equals poverty, equals disadvantage, equals is something that needs to be disrupted. And I think a new generation of leaders that will be coming through investing in diversity would want to disrupt certain narratives around class, gender, and race. You know, so that's the first thing, because they're doing it in their schools as we speak. They're the ones who are swimming against the tide, you know, and they're actually making a difference. But what they need to know is how class inequality is embedded in the system. And so on this current slide, I'm just going to very quickly read anything by Pierre Bourdieu on cultural capital and differential achievement, read anything by Raymond Boudon on class position and educational attainment. But let me bring you right up to date with Dominic Cummings, who's just packed his bags and his little cardboard box and left number 10. When I first became aware of Dominic Cummings was in 2013, when he wrote a paper called Genetics Outweighs Teaching. Now, I'm trying to explain to people how class inequality, Graham, is embedded in our system. So when you've got government advisors that are, and at the time it was Michael Gove, that he was the great advisor to, Dominic Cummings wrote this paper, and I think you can download it on the internet, right? Genetics Outweighs Teaching. And basically what he talked about was the fact that the investment in places like Sure Start was a waste of time, because genetics, white working class genetics, is always going to outweigh teaching. So it doesn't matter how much resources you put in, how good the teachers are. If you come from the white working class, you know, remember he's a eugenicist. The other thing you all need to read is the bell curve. Yeah. Then you'll find out, and what happened as a result of that paper, by the way, which wasn't a white paper or green paper, didn't go through any committees, but influenced policy, was that the millions that the government had put into Sure Start to make sure that all kids got the best possible start, irrespective of background, in schools, that funding was stopped. So there are real policy-driven embedded inequalities in our system that are driven by a mindset that it has this deficit narrative around class, around gender, and around race. Can we have the next slide, please? Graham,
okay.
do you want to say something about this?
So we did say we talk about gender a bit.
Yeah.
Girls do better than boys pretty much all the way through the system, whatever kind of test you use. Since we moved away from coursework, that gap's got slightly smaller, but it's still persistent. One of the striking things is that when you take account of the overall level of achievement, for Black boys, the gaps seem to be a bit larger. But it is persistent. So you can see there, we've got under 30% of Black Caribbean boys, English and maths pass, meaning a level 4. in 2018. The equivalent figure for white boys with free school meals is a couple of percentage points higher. So it's not statistically very different at all. So the idea that genetics are important, I don't think the data supports. It says environment, it says lack of money in household to buy books to take you out to nice things probably makes a very big difference. And pretending that it's to do with genetics, you know, it's not science.
Absolutely.
You know, genetics is real, but the effects that are claimed for it are coming out of just very strange, misguided thinking. Should we just have a look at the next slide? Yeah, we talked a bit about things that might have made a difference. Should we talk a bit about London Challenge?
Yeah, definitely.
We've both did quite a lot of work on it.
Yeah, yeah. There's 4 things on there. There's one thing I do want to say from here, Graham, that links to your previous slide about English and maths and boys and girls. When myself and Cara Hunt and Carleen Rickard did the research, the educational experiences and achievement of Black boys in London schools in 2000 and 2003, we found some very, very simple things that were happening in London that were ensuring that Black boys, for example, weren't doing well in English or in maths. One very simple thing was that Black boys were being put in bottom set maths groups where they were not taking higher tier GCSE, so they didn't stand a chance in hell of getting a higher grade, because the highest grade that they could get in some of the syllabi that they were taking was AD. A lot of the schools that were failing Black children, when we look at the maths departments, didn't have a mathematician that had a qualification in maths. And where there were good math teachers, they were not put on the sets where the Black boys were put. And when we asked about allocation to sets, we were always told it was with regards to the levels of attainment. But when you talk to people in the staff room, the conversation would go, he doesn't deserve to be in the top set because of his behavior. And so you have these parallel ways of operating which ensure that kids do fail in certain subjects. That was borne out again when we did aiming high. Some of the schools were so racist that they gave back the £25,000 that they had per year to take part in aiming high. 2 of my schools sent it back to the DFE and said that they didn't want to take part anymore. So the other thing that we have to face is that actually some places don't want to change. Yeah. They don't want to change. They don't want to see things change. But London Challenge did make a difference, Graham. But my concern about London Challenge, so London Challenge ran between 2003 and 2011.
Yeah.
For those people who don't know, that's where the funding for investing in diversity came from London Challenge money to look at Black leadership in schools. You look at any of the London Challenge reports that talk about the success of London Challenge, and look where they were focused. Look at the 5 boroughs where they were focused: Lambeth, Southwark, Hackney, Haringey, and Islington. Huge Black populations in terms of school pupil demographic and in terms of staff demographic. And I challenge any of you to pick up a London Challenge report or any of the celebratory stuff that's talked about how London Challenge moves schools forward, and see if the word Black is mentioned once. No reference to the fact that they were focused in Black boroughs, No reference to the fact that there was money put into Black leadership, which Graham says, and I know, changed the face of London schools. Dawn Ferdinand is on this call. Marva's just gone. You know, they literally doubled the numbers of head teachers in Black head teachers in some boroughs. But it's not recognized, Graham. Yeah. It's not recognized. And that's why I'm writing the books now, to put it on the map, so that people understand that we have made a difference, we do make a difference. And actually, when you tap into Black excellence, things will change for everybody.
Absolutely. I mean, I ran the EAL element of London Challenge. And I just keep looking at these reports and thinking, did they not realize that between pupils with EAL and Black pupils, some of whom have EAL, you are talking about the overwhelming majority of the pupils in the schools that were affected by London Challenge. But there's just no mention. You know, it's undoubtedly one of the most successful school improvement projects in history. I'm glad it's written up, because the model was one that, yeah. I mean, in Tim Brighouse's words, got behind schools, not on top of them.
Yeah.
It's a very collaborative model. And if you talk to Tim or David Woods, they're very clear about the fact that it addressed diversity issue well was one of the things that made it successful. But those who write it up just don't seem to get it. So the book definitely needs to remind them, Rosemary.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because what we get, you see, folks, is this constant narrative about Black underachievement, and it wears people down. You know, the young teachers coming into the system think, oh, well, we're not doing anything. We've never done anything. And what this talk is about saying to you that when we focused on our own communities, we've made a difference. And when the focus has been on us, and we have been driving that change in terms of the London Challenge. Next time you pick up a London Challenge report, understand Lambeth, Southwark, Hackney, Haringey, Islington, full of Black kids, full of Black educators. And yes, we work side by side with our white colleagues to change things, but there is something that we bring to the piece which is additional. Rebecca, can we have the next slide? Graham, what do you want to say about fixed term exclusion?
This will come as no surprise to you that Caribbean pupils are much more likely to be excluded than any other group other than Gypsy Roma. Of course, as a group, they are much larger than Gypsy Roma. So it's many more pupils being excluded. That's only fixed term exclusions. And it's a percentage of pupils in each group. If you look at the number of actual exclusions, because some of these pupils are excluded multiply, it's much, much worse. For me, the most shocking statistic of all, which is a consequence of this and what happens to permanently excluded and some fixed term excluded pupil, is that if you take the ethnicity breakdown of every school in England and put them all in rank order for the number of Caribbean pupils they have, of the top 8, 7 are pupil referral units. Now, surely that's something that should wake some people up and say there's something wrong with what's going on. But the reason we've had today is because these things are just not talked about. Can I just say, looking at the chat, where Mark Sims said there are consultations going on at the moment and really kind of pleading with people to respond. Just so those who don't know Mark, well, I don't think he's officially here on behalf of Ofsted. He is actually a senior HMI who currently works for Ofsted, who's very committed to the things that we're talking about. Can we help him out and all try to get involved in that consultation? I'm conscious that it's getting near 5 o'clock. And I think, I can't remember if there's a slide after this.
Yes, there is. There is.
Might be time, yeah.
Yeah.
After this, to try and open it up.
Yeah, definitely, Graham.
Yeah.
The thing that I wanted to say, and definitely please support Mark in terms of getting that information into the inquiry that's going on. The thing that I wanted to say was that as an Ofsted inspector, actually, one of the things that I used to do is to broaden my definition of exclusions. So if you took a kid called Michael, a black boy, and you took a kid called Juan, a Chinese boy, and remember what Graham's first slide said, they both start relatively equally in school. But what Juan doesn't have to deal with are these disruptions. So I'm going from 1960 through to 2020, what the disruptions have looked like. Being labeled educationally subnormal, special educational needs when you're not. Being put into technical schools. That's where my husband, when he came over, he was 10 years old and he went straight into a technical school because he was considered to be not academic enough to go to the other secondary modern schools that were going at the time. In Birmingham, by the way, for the Birmingham teachers, there was a color bar and a busing system going on. And I have evidence of that. And it happened in terms of the school that I went to when I passed my 11+, King Edward's Grammar School in Handsworth. It's changed now, but that's the reality. As an Ofsted inspector, I used to see kids sitting outside classrooms all the time. Next slide, Rebecca. And these are the other disruptions that Juan doesn't have to deal with, but Michael does. The containment and control. So many of my conversations as a head teacher with teachers in my school around Black kids were not about pedagogical responses to learning, but about how they could contain and manage and control their behavior. Streaming and setting, bottom sets, bottom streams, often with less qualified teachers, often with covered teachers because of staff turnover. Then they were off-rolled, you know, this nice kind of, you know, they just kind of disappear. You never see them again. A restricted curriculum content that's inappropriate and sometimes psychologically damaging. If you're taught Black history and your beginning of Black history is slavery, and you learn, as I did in my lovely King Edward's Grammar School, that the only Black girl in the class, and when they were doing African history and slavery, the geography teacher wrote my name, Campbell, in big black letters across the blackboard and said, there's somebody in the class who is an expert on what we're going to be doing today. And she asked me to stand up and she said, where does your name come from? And I said, it was Jamaican. I said it 3 times. I knew it was wrong by the 3rd time. She said to me, no, your name is not Jamaican. She pulled down the world map in front of the blackboard. Those of you who are old enough will remember that on a spring thing so that it just stops. And then she pointed to West Africa and said, your descendants came from Africa as slaves to the West Indies. And you would have been, your ancestors would have been owned by a plantation where the plantation owner was called Campbell. Campbell is a Scottish name, now sit down. Psychologically damaging. A lot of what we go through in our schools, and we don't look at the psychological damage that goes to being Black and living and just being in our society. Teacher expectation and teacher assessment. Microaggressions against even our hair. Managed moves, pupil referral units. Why are we 100% filled in pupil referral units? Why are we 100% in alternative provision? And at the end of it, for those who manage, the Michaels who do manage to stay through all of that, at 16, not entered for exams or not entered for higher tier exams. So when we're talking about exclusion, exclusion takes the form of disruption to a broad, balanced, caring and nurturing curriculum. So just quickly move on, Rebecca, so that we can get people in. Yeah, this is all I wanted to end on, Graham, before we get people in. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's okay.
Listen, we can make a difference, but we can't be naive about it. And we definitely can't be politically naive about it. We have to understand how the system works. So the first thing that we need to do is not be Donald Trump. Understand that you work in a systemically racist system. Just understand that. It's not about blaming anybody, just understand it. And for those of you who are thinking, oh, you know, she's a little bit over the top, this racist system has been 400 years in the making. It's well done now. It's overdone, okay? So we live and work in a racist system. Acknowledge that class, as well as race inequity, is embedded in the system. And it's embedded in the system by using pseudoscience, as Graham quite rightly called it, written by right-wing people and right-wing think tanks about class, and saying, well, you know, no point us investing in Sure Start because these people are genetically not going to be beneficial to our capitalist society. Then what you do when you've got over that kind of shock, you do what I did. That's why I look so good now, approaching 60, right? That's why I look so good. I decide that I can't bring down the system. I can't burn down Babylon. But what I can actually do is limit the worst excesses of the system. And we collectively can do that. Through anti-racist leadership, through great teachers, like the great teachers that I had in my primary school in Handsworth growing up, all white teachers. And they were fantastic because they believed in themselves and their capacity to make a difference. You need an empowering and liberating curriculum in which students see themselves reflected. That's what needs to happen in 2020 now. We need enabling language. We need tough love, pastoral care. We need moral purpose and honesty. We need respectful partnerships with the stakeholders, including the governors. I can see that Sharon Warmington's on this call, National Black Governor Network, and including, of course, our parents. And I can see that Cassius is on the call in terms of the work that is crucial and critical in terms of partnership with parents. Success and shared stories of success. That's what we need out there. The head teacher of the year just chosen, Evelyn Ford, is actually an Investing in Diversity alumni. And I was saying to other people, you know, there's so many of us out there. We need to be sharing those stories. Investing isn't a dark secret. Let people know that that was part of your journey. And that's how you became head teacher. That contributed to how you became head teacher of the year. Efficacy and a willingness to act, and physical school environments that are conducive to purpose. Graham, I think we should open up.
We should open it up, yeah. So we don't have many questions, to be honest.
But people might just want to jump on.
If someone wants to say something, can you just indicate? I'd really like to hear. There are at least 3 head teachers, successful head teachers in the audience from one of you.
Hi, Adrian. I can see Adrian.
Adrian's there. Dawn's there. I think Susan Service is there as well.
Anne Palmer, doing fantastic leadership work. Is there anybody who wants to? Tracy, you're there. Tracy Campbell. Anybody want to indicate? I
don't know who dare you pick on is the question.
I know. So Rebecca, I'm going to just ask you to just go back to the slides while people indicate, and we can bring them in at any point. So Rebecca, I wonder whether you could just go back to the slides very quickly. And I can see my niece, Charmaine Campbell, who's also a teacher. I'm really proud of her. Hi, Charmaine. Okay, next slide, please. Because I wanted to end up on a high, you know, I just asked some of my girlfriends in Birmingham, where I grew up, so which schools are swimming against the tide now in my hometown? And that's just a few of them, you know, that's just a few of them. So this thing about the deficit narrative that needs to be disrupted is about us shining a spotlight on where things are going right, where things are going in a positive direction. And I said to Graham, because we both know Waltham Forest, I said, well, you know, back in the day, and so I was in Waltham Forest between 89 and 95. And I said, back in the day, Graham, I remember a school called Norlington Boys. Norlington Boys was always doing well by African Caribbean youngsters. Please tell me it's still doing it.
Well, I have the privilege to be a director of the Exceptional Education Trust, which is Norlington Boys, in effect. And it is doing fantastic things. It is very well run. It helps lots of other schools, and I'm sure it will have some other schools under its wing soon. And I mean, it was the first school I went into after lockdown, actually. I've been there in September. First school I've been into since March. And it is just a joy because it's so organized. It expects no one to fail. Exclusion is rare because all of the pupils are engaged. The leadership team resembles the pupils.
Yes.
The middle managers resemble. I mean, I have to say, I think they've coped particularly well with COVID. Lots of nice things happening. Like many schools, they've had to spend an awful lot of time planning what ifs, but they're ready to go if it happens. Can I just say a word about Hampstead Hall? Just on that list.
Yes.
It's a school I've had quite a bit to do with over the years. The first thing to say about it is that the first Hampstead Hall I met was black, and the second Hampstead Hall head I met is Asian. There aren't that many schools where you can say that that's the sequence of headship. The other thing to say is what Hampstead Hall has really invested in is teaching all of its pupils how the language of academic success works and doing it very explicitly. They don't just teach subjects and expect you to be able to express it. And if I can just do a little advert here, but an event we're having similar to this one, except it's more of a taster for a course next Thursday at 10 o'clock. We will be talking about the course that basically empowered Hampstead Hall to do what it's done in terms of the dramatic improvement in its result. But it's in a context of a school whose staff and leaders, again, look like the pupils. And we can't overemphasize that. Okay. Do we have John?
There's a couple of questions. And I just need the next slide to just help me, Rebecca, just move on. Right. So when you get your slides set, there'll be references, okay? And all the references that I've talked about are on there. In that reference section, if you read one book, look at Gus John's Taking a Stand, and it kind of summarizes, if you like, all the things that I've been talking about the Black experience for really the last the last 60 years and how it has impacted in terms of education. Thanks for that, Cassius, about Heartlands Academy in Birmingham was voted as School of the Year, TES, fabulous. And again, as you've said there, Cassius, a significant number of Blacks and minority ethnic students, but not reported in the mainstream press. Yeah. One of the things that we need to begin to do is to do our own writing and our own reporting and our own sharing. And that means as well, dumping some of the language that has been used to label us. So I'll just have a little pitch here in terms of an article that I'm bringing out next week. I don't use BAME or blame or any of the other stupid names that they have for calling us. I call us part of the global majority. And we need to start using that term as a collective term. When we're talking about our individual circumstances, obviously talk about Black, African, African Caribbean, Asian, etc., etc. It doesn't deny our individual identities. But listen, just think about this for a moment. The global majority are African, Asian, mixed race, dual heritage, global racialized people of the South. That makes us the global majority by a long way. 80% of the people on this planet belong to the global majority. When you start thinking about yourself like that, you operate in very, very different ways. The only people who don't want us to think like that are the people who know that they are the minority. Okay? So start thinking about yourselves as global majority. I'm bringing out an article next week, and it's about then how our issues, how our successes become the things that are part of the majority dialogue. It moves it away from the margins, because whilst we continue to use minority, ethnic, minority, BAME, blame, whatever we want to call ourselves, yeah, then we are going to continually be in a situation. I can see my niece rolling around because she knows that Auntie Rose is off the hook. We're continually going to be in a situation where we are marginalized and the issues to do with us are marginalized. And if there's anything that we've learned through COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter colliding, is that these are global issues. And so when we're dealing with the global majority, we're dealing with the issues that pertain to the majority. And we have to come up with the solutions for ourselves. There are some fantastic things in there. Hello, Liz Pemberton. Also really acknowledging how the early years sector must be held accountable in shaping the narrative for Black children. So a lovely post. Please follow Liz Pemberton. Absolutely fantastic in terms of the stuff that she's doing for early years. And she comes from very, very good stock, I have to say, and continuing that work. Absolutely brilliant. I mean, Black excellence is everywhere. Yes. And so really we need to step into our power, work along with our allies. Graham is an old mate of mine, a longtime friend. And one of the things that I have loved about what COVID has done is that it has enabled me to have real honest conversations with my white mates, you know, so I can have real proper conversations with Graham without me tippy-toeing around, and, you know, I can really have real honest conversations, and it's good. Yeah, sometimes they have to go away and have lie down in a darkened room for a little while until they kind of get over it. But most of the time, the engagement is good, isn't it, Graham?
Yeah, and I'd say I just on that issue, as Gus John is the person highlighted there, I was trying to say that 15 years ago, after I'd organised what I think was the first ever conference on white working class underachievement, I was invited onto Radio 2. I don't know whether it still has Nikki Campbell doing the same thing at 8 o'clock every morning. But after the news, they try to have a heated debate.
Yeah.
So they invited Gus. Because I'd run this conference, they invited me. And they were really disappointed because they couldn't really get a credit card between us. I mean, the agenda they were advancing is, well, we should stop spending all this money on, not that it's a large amount, but spending money on things that will help the global majority. We should spend it all on the white working class. And I obviously wasn't having any of that, and nor was he. But we did manage to have a disagreement because Gus said that some communities organise supplementary schools to help their children, and that shows how much they care, and some communities don't. And I challenged him on that, and I said, some communities don't have the capacity. We should be helping them to do it. And when you go and offer them help, they do it. So that was it. I mean, at that point, Nikki Campbell got very excited and became more. Oh, I agree with Gus. Everything he said. So I don't know, maybe we could tempt Gus to come and talk at one of these.
Oh, yeah.
Gonna have some more.
Oh, absolutely. That would be absolutely fabulous. I really just want to draw some attention, Graham, to some things in the chat. Adrian Rollins talks about the power of a network and the importance of us networking together. Adrian is absolutely right. I couldn't have survived without my network around me. And I really want to draw attention to Ann Palmer's work in terms of the race charter mark for schools and colleges. And she has put her details there, www.figtreeinternational.org.uk, race charter mark. Please look at it, because it's a way, and again, for those of you who don't know Ann Palmer, one of our super heads who's really contributed to the system and to thinking, and is now out there doing leadership work, and has produced this charter mark. So if you're in a school, perhaps even up in Birmingham or elsewhere, and you're unaware of this new race charter mark, it's actually produced by the professionals to work side by side with you to ensure that your school is a safe and good place for learning to take place. And I'd like to offer 2 areas of research for those people who are researching out there. The first is about how you teach bodily kinesthetic youngsters to access academic concepts. Those of you who know me will know that this has been a bugbear for some time. If you really want to raise the level of attainment of working class kids, Black boys, and other underachieving groups, then a key area to look at in terms of research is how you teach bodily kinesthetic youngsters academic concepts. Because what we've tended to do with bodily kinesthetic youngsters is to say, okay, they don't need to take the academic subjects because they're good at music, they're good at PE, they're good at drama, they're good at art, they're good at working with their hands and making things, and that's bodily kinesthetic. I want to offer you a little bit of hope, and just put a light bulb moment in your head for a minute. Those people who've looked at bodily kinesthetic learners, you know, so all the people that we put into practical subjects, imagine if all of our Black footballers were actually trained in terms of academic concepts via their bodily kinesthetic intelligence, their preferred way of learning. Very many of them will have the propensity for top set maths, and top set science, because that's where the bodily kinesthetic sits. It's not just about being bodily aware and movement. It also gives you the propensity for top set maths and top set science. So we actually need some research around this to get people to begin to think more about this. Charlotte Davis is saying in response, Rosemary, I would argue that you make sure that they have motor sensory integration. They can all be skilled and all-round learners. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And one of the things that we did to raise our English literature results in 1 year, when I was a head teacher, in 1 year, we had a real dip in our English lit results. It was really poor, beyond poor. And I'm a teacher of English, so I just wasn't having it. So we bought our English literature papers back from the exam boards, and we did a little bit of analysis. So we looked at which questions were poorly answered by our students, and then we did an analysis by teacher. The one question, and it's still the same in English Lit GCSE, that if you are unable to answer this question, you will not get a higher grade in English Lit, is how does the writer use language to convey meaning? If the student can't answer that question, how does the writer use language to convey meaning? They will not be getting a higher grade in English Lit. When we did the analysis by teacher, we realized that my drama specialist was the one, and we had to draft her in to teach English because we didn't have enough English specialists that year. So we just drafted her in at the last minute, and you know, Ellie Wood, her name was. I'm just struggling for her name. Ellie Wood. I can see her now. Young, bright white girl, you know, just bubbly, bubbly, bubbly. And she came into school just like a beam of light. And she said, yeah, I can teach English. Yeah, you know, I can do that. The kids in Ellie's class were able to answer that question because she used drama techniques to teach conveyance of meaning. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of us getting really focused, in terms of us being the researchers and becoming the pedagogues, in terms of shifting this whole underachievement agenda forward. It's doable. What say you, Graham, my mate?
I agree, absolutely. I'd really like to hear if they want to offer. I know there are at least 4 head teachers still with us. If they want to say something, because you and I reflect on it.
Yeah.
We get passionate about it.
Yeah.
And we do things to help people. We're not doing it at the moment. So maybe I will try and persuade some of those head teachers to talk at the next event about what we're doing.
I think that's a good idea. I think that, you know, because they can share.
Because I don't want this to be a one-off.
Yeah. If people are up for it, what say you all? Those of you that are still here, quite a few of you are still here. It would, okay, I can see some thumbs up. Put the thumbs up. We can see some thumbs up there. Yeah. I think the practitioner sharing good practice is absolutely vital, especially now when people are feeling so overwhelmed things, Graham, and having to shift the dial in terms of how they're doing things and so on. We need some new practice, don't we? And we need some new spaces where people can kind of rejuvenate themselves.
Yeah. I think maybe, well, I'm going to call this the end. It's not. It's the beginning.
Yeah.
We probably need to wind this call up, but we will have more conversations, and I look forward to seeing many of you again, and some of you I will be pursuing to play lead roles in those few conversations. I think you know who you are. But please don't hide, because I'll set Rosemary on you if you do. I know because she can be very persuasive. So thank you so much for coming. Not possible without you. There's lots of interesting things in the chat. I said, my only regret is that although we probably get to see more people this way that did it face to face, there are so many people here who've offered so much over the years to education that I would love to have caught up with. And they will say hello to you. I wave sometimes in the chat room. All for coming, and we hope to see you again at the next conversation. Thank you, Rosemary, very much for persuading me to do it and for leading it as well as you have.
Oh, thank you so much, Graham. And we're seeing the chat. We're not going to lose the chat. There are people here who are volunteering, putting their hands up and saying, yes, we want to be part of this. We want to share. And yeah, it's great seeing you all again, Sharon, Paulette Osborne, super heads up there, Graham. There's some people here who have shifted the dial. They really have. And so we've got to collect that practice and get it out there, haven't we?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think so. So we'll do this again.
Yep.
And
I think you've finally frozen, Rosemary. We feared this might happen. I'm glad it didn't happen until now. Let's give her a minute, see if we get her back.
Those of you who were persuaded to advertise it as, okay. Hi, am I back?
Yeah, you're back now.
Can you hear me? Okay,
yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to apologize to those people who were came onto this chat because they saw Graham's first advert, which said free sex, race, and class. When I first talked to Graham, I says, who's going to want to listen to two old mates talking about data? So we've got to make this thing sexy. So I said to him, let's call it sex, race, and class. So he said, yeah, cool. So then he runs off and puts this advert up saying free sex, race, and class. So for those of you who joined and have been disappointed, next time we will try to please. Thank you ever so much. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, everybody, and we hope to see you soon. Bye.